experience. And then inspired by a similar trend where people create like a horror story in only 5 words. I want you to do that here, but I'd like you to give me your 3-word why the training was so bad, right? 3 words, just 3 words why the training was so bad. And I'll do mine first too. Mine was facilitators' personal stories. Ooh, no supports. Reading from slides. That's a really good one. That's a really good one. I had a facilitator who, someone just used one word, nightmare. I love that. Didn't start on time. Oh, this is repetitive and unorganized, monotonous, dull, task-based, right? I unfortunately had an experience that was virtual where the person shared so many personal stories, and it wasn't the personal stories that had to do with the content. It was just like her life, how she became a facilitator, how she, you know, did all these things. And it had nothing to do with the actual content. It would have been fine if she was sharing personal stories about her experience with the content. But it was, you know, it just was, I don't know what we were supposed to get out of it, right? We see last minute updates, frequent disconnection. The trainer didn't show up. I love that one, Amy. Breaks longer than the modules. Sorry, I'm laughing at some of these because I've been there, right? Internet challenges, not detailed, right? So my goal today is to help you avoid these things in the future, to make sure that somebody is somewhere is not giving 3 words about your training experiences, right? So we're going to start at the very beginning, right? And I want to make a couple of assumptions here. I realize that if you're training, you may be building the training and then facilitating it, but you also may be a trainer in the sense that you are given things and you are just expected to facilitate them, and you've got agendas that are scheduled down to the minute, right? So no matter your level of control, we're going to talk about ways that you can make those experiences more impactful today, whether you are the one designing and developing these experiences or whether you are purely facilitating them, right? But where I want to start is the very, very beginning. Every training that you work on, every training that you facilitate should have an outcome. And these are my definitions, by the way, here. But the outcome is basically the change in the organization or the employees or the customers that helps to drive those business results. So why are we doing this training? What's the overall goal here? That's the outcome. So, you know, if you're working on onboarding, maybe your outcome is to prepare new hires to be able to start their work, right? If you're doing something with leadership development, maybe that outcome looks something like we want our leaders to be more skilled at having difficult conversations. Maybe you are working with a product that your company sells and you want to help your customers, and your customer education is, you know, this training is to help people to use our product better, more efficiently, you know, whatever that goal is. But it's kind of that high level goal, right? That's the outcome. And then the objectives are the task-based statements that describe what somebody will do, an emphasis on do after the learning experience. So if our overarching outcome and goal is to help people get ready to do their new job as new hires, right? If we're talking onboarding, then maybe those objectives are something like, we want them to be able to log into the HR system and be able to see their pay statements and request time off and things like that. If we're talking about leadership development, maybe those tasks are, we want people to have more performance related conversations with their employees, right? Maybe we want the leaders to be having more conversations, even if that means difficult conversations with their people, right? And so once we kind of have our arms around, we need an outcome and we need objectives, then we can go into kind of creating them. And now I realize that not everybody is going to be creating their own learning objectives. Again, some of you might be handed slide decks that already have them built in, right? But even if that's the case, you can still kind of create your own objectives if you don't like what you've been given, or if you don't think that they really are task-based. I've seen a lot of objectives where it's, they're very vague or they're very difficult to kind of say, how are we going to accomplish this with this one training, right? So you have an opportunity to kind of create your own objectives if you don't like what's already there. And of course, that would be just for you. But what it's going to help you do as a trainer is it's going to help you really focus that session, right? Keeping that outcome in the back of your mind and those objectives in the front of your mind as you're presenting is going to help you make sure that you stay focused, that you stay on task, and that you make sure that it's beneficial for your audience, right? So if you're not able to create your own objectives, that's fine, but you can also just know this as you're assessing the objectives that you've been given, right? So one really helpful way is to just think of this ABCD method, right? And we look first at the audience. So who do we want to do the thing? In the case of onboarding, it's our new hires, right? What do we want them to do? Again, emphasis on this idea of do. We're not saying what do we want them to learn? What do we want them to go and do after this session? Yes, we want them to know how to log into their thing, log into their system. Yes, we want them to have these conversations with their people. Yes, we want them to be able to train the customers well. And we want them to learn how to, we want the customers to learn how to use the product. But what do we want them to actually do? Do we want them to log into the system and request time off without needing help of their supervisor, right? And so that's what we have to think about. And then what are the circumstances or context, right? Under what conditions, right? A lot of times we forget about this when we're training. We go, oh, well, they have to know how to do X, Y, Z. But then we give them these very short training experiences. And then when it's time for them to actually go log into that HRIS system, or it's time for them to actually go use the product, they go, oh, wait, I forget. And we'll talk about some ways to help them retain that information in a little bit here. But if their initial thing is, oh, wait, I forget, and they have to message their boss, send an email or send a message to their boss, or call them over if they're in person and say, hey, can you show me again how to do this? Can you show me how to log in again? We don't want that, right? So we have to be very specific. We want our new hires to log into the HR system independently without the help of their manager. And we want them to, D is degree. So it means like, what is the standard or level of accuracy, right? And it depends on the training, right? So if we want our new hires to log in every time correctly and request time off without the help of their manager every time, that's fine, but it's not always, we don't always need them to do it with perfect accuracy every time, right? If it's something like leadership training where it's on soft skills, it might be like, we want to see an improvement in the way employees are rating their bosses on their performance, right? We want, our company does 360 reviews where we have their bosses assess their performance and their employees, and we want to see that employee score go up, but it doesn't have to be 100%, right? We have to think about what level or what standard we are trying to get to, right? So when we create these kinds of objectives and things like that, we want to avoid vague words, first of all. Words like understand or know, it's very hard to measure those things because understanding, everyone has a different level of understanding, and it's really hard to assess someone else's level of understanding. But if the goal is we want them to be able to understand, but then turn around and do the thing, right? We can measure them doing the thing better than we can measure them understanding it, right? So we could try to avoid vague words like that are too hard to kind of define, and objectives that can't be measured, right? If it's not something that we can say, well, we want our customers to be able to use our product independently without contacting our help desk. Well, how are we going to measure that? That one's easy. We look at our help desk tickets, right? Are we looking for a reduction of those help desk tickets? Because we can directly relate that to the objective. But things like understand the core values of our organization, right? That's a little bit harder because that is such an abstract thing, right? How do we know they understand those core values? Maybe it's better to ask that, or maybe it's better to make an objective that says we want them to demonstrate some kind of understanding, whether that's through conversations but something tangible, right, is what we're looking for. And then the last thing that we want to avoid is we don't want to make it about the trainer, right? We don't want the objectives to be teach, blah, 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 right? Because that has to do with the facilitator. Unless we do want the learners to go and teach something to their people, we don't want to word them like from the perspective of the trainer, if that makes sense. And so, thinking about, again, if you don't have control over these, if there's something that's been given to you, just use this as a way to assess those and say, are these really clear? Is this really easy for me to follow as a facilitator? Are these things that I can actually affect, right? So as we go through this, I'm going to have each section, I'm going to have a reflection question for you. And I'd love us to take a couple minutes in the chat here to talk about how could having clear objectives and outcomes help you be a better trainer? What are some of the ways that that can help you by having these very clear outcomes and objectives? Brittany says, stay on task, organize the training. Absolutely. Clarity of direction, know what's expected from you, keeps the focus on the need. Absolutely. Expectation setting, both from the trainer perspective and the perspective of the learner. Yep, we know what to assess, expectations, content preparation. It really helps us plan, right? It helps us plan not only before the session, but it helps us plan as we're delivering the session. I like that it helps, oh no, I scrolled right past it, helps you avoid the creepies. Exactly. It gives you more clarity on your direction as a trainer, not only the audience too. And whether or not, we're not going to get into the debate of whether or not you should share these objectives with your learners. People feel very differently about whether or not you should share those objectives out with your learners. I have heard good arguments on both sides, but for you as the trainer, I think it's really, really important to have those too. We're not fighting on a Monday. I just don't have the energy. So exactly. All of these things are how we kind of set the stage, right? To show that I love that the last comment is demonstrate different styles and understanding participants, because that's exactly where we're going to move to next, is learning more about your audience. So once we figure out these outcomes and these objectives, this is our goal. This is what we want. What about our specific audience in that moment, right? Because we can plan all we want, but every different class, every different cohort, every different audience is going to be very different. Now, this slide says no survey needed, but I will say, if you can ask these questions to your learners and your audience ahead of time, please do. This will help you, right? This will help you to better understand them. But a lot of times we don't have this opportunity, right? We just we dive right in and we meet these people on day one, right? The day of the training. So we usually think in training of nonverbal cues as an indicator of engagement, interaction, but I want us to also think about both verbal and nonverbal cues that can let us know that people know things or they don't know, like how it relates to the content, not just the level of engagement, right? But what they know or don't know already, right? And so reading between those lines, how do we know if they already know something? What are some of those verbal and nonverbal cues? Maybe perhaps they're saying things like, oh, we talked about this at such and such event, or, oh, we went over this last week at, this meeting that we had. You can hear some of those verbal cues where people go, oh yeah, I remember this. And like you hear those and you say, okay, they're familiar with this concept. They've heard it before, right? Another nonverbal indication is people that were paying attention start to drift or get distracted if they, if they stop participating. If they were participating before and now they're not. This can be in person or virtual, right? They were typing away in the chat and now all of a sudden they're not. Or, they were taking notes and now they're not, right? So that tells us that either they don't think it applies to them or they already know it, right? But there's some sort of disconnect there where they go, oh, I don't need this, right? And we look for those cues. We look for those things. And then especially because we're going to talk a lot in the upcoming slides about opportunities to practice, applying it to their real world practical application. And what we want when we kind of create those situations is we want them to be able to feel free and feel confident, making mistakes, experimenting, role-playing, things like that, right? So how do we know if they're afraid of messing up? Well, they give a lot of safe answers, right? They give like very vague, generic, like, oh, that could be the answer to anything. Like, what makes a good leader, right? And somebody says, oh, well, they care about their team, right? Like, it's a very safe answer, right? Or what makes a bad leader? Oh, they're mean and they micromanage, like very safe answers mean that maybe they're afraid of messing up. Unwillingness to volunteer. You call for volunteers and everybody kind of, I don't want to volunteer. Oh, I don't want to, you've all seen it before. Avoid eye contact if you don't want to volunteer, right? But that just lets you know, especially if you have multiple people in the group doing it, maybe they're afraid of messing up. Maybe they're afraid of being wrong. Maybe the culture at the organization kind of supports that. So you have to build that trust. You have to be able to, and Anna mentioned, it can be obvious by their body language, right? And that's absolutely true. So you can kind of sense those things and then hopefully alter your content a little, which we'll talk about in a second, based on that. But you also want to look at, what do they think success is? What are some verbal and nonverbal cues that they're paying attention, they're ready, they're engaged, they are totally listening? These can be things like comments, right? Asking good questions. They're starting to ask questions. They're starting to, get really involved. They're taking pictures of the slides. They're taking copious notes. They're scribbling. They're leaning in. They're becoming more participatory, whether in the chat or coming off mute, things like that, right? Those are some of the ways that you can see, okay, yes, they're paying attention. They're engaged. And Pam asked a really good question in the chat. What do you do if you have to teach a group that already knows the content? So, and especially, what do you do if they already know the content and you've just got the slide deck, right? And they say, you have the agenda scheduled for you down to the minute, right? And it will say, spend 15 minutes on this, and they already all know it, right? How can we make some changes when we don't create the content ourselves, when they do already know all of the content, right? So one of the first things we can do is, instead of changing the actual content, we just reframe the way it's presented. So if they do already know everything, do you as a facilitator know enough to take them to the next level, right? To give them scenarios, to give them more advanced opportunities to role play, to let them tell their stories or their experiences, and then bring that back to the content and then be able to relay it, to turn it into more of like an elevated review session where, yeah, we're going to review the stuff that you already know, but we're going to elevate it by sharing new experiences, by sharing new ideas, by asking questions to get you to think about it, by maybe you present them with a case study or a scenario and you have them critique how somebody else is doing the thing, right? To even solidify that knowledge even more, right? Another thing you can do is start asking really good questions, right? come up with some really great reflection questions, come up with some really great group discussion questions. If they already know the content or they're struggling with a particular area, take a minute and pause there, get them discussing it, ask some of those questions, ask for their experience with it. And then of course, flex it where you can, right? Flexing the agenda. So if the agenda says spend 15 minutes on something they already know, that you can tell everybody in this room already knows this, let's maybe spend 5, and then we'll use that other 10 minutes where later on, when we need a little more time for something, when we see those visible cues that they're struggling a little bit, that they're, you know, a little bit confused, let's spend more time there, right? My reflection question for you for this section is a unique one. And I really want you to think very carefully about this, because I want you to think about it from your learners or your audience's perspective, thinking that they may not know the outcomes. They may not know the objectives, right? So then they may not know the content either. This may be their first time hearing it. So how would they know that the training session was worth their time, right? How would they realize, what would make them walk away going, oh, that was really helpful, or that was really useful, or that was a really great training session? If they don't know the outcomes, if they don't know the objectives, if they don't know the content, then how else will they know that it's a good use of their time? Effective delivery and value added, I see in the comment. Aha moments happen early. Okay. When they talk more about what they learned. If they find it relevant. Increased confidence. Oh, look at when they relate to it. If they remembered something, they can relate with practical experiences. Great. These are all great answers. Is there 3 things that they've learned? Their takeaways. If they're able to share their takeaways. Some of these answers are a little abstract, and I would encourage you to think more deeply about how will they know? Because if they're engaged at the training session, will they still be engaged after the fact? I really like somebody said when they put it into practice, is there something that they can take from this training and use tomorrow, today, in their jobs, right? That's one of the best ways to show them the value of it, right? Is if they can go turn around and use it right now. And that's some of the things that you all are saying here in the comments as well, which I love. So we have these outcomes and objectives. We have this idea of like leaning into our audience to assess how they're feeling, and we can kind of pivot and adapt based on that. But what about the actual content itself? How do we make sure that they're going to remember it when they encounter it? How, that's one of the things someone said, if they're able to retain it, right? If they're able to retain, implement with ease, and see the results. But how do we make sure that they can do that, right? So we have to design these sessions, and we have to deliver these sessions with retention and application in mind, right? First of all, I'm of the belief, and this is, part of why I use the word useful all the time in my life and in my work and in my branding, is because I think that the most engaging thing that a learning experience can be is useful. It doesn't matter what game you have. It doesn't matter what activities you have. It doesn't matter what polls you have, what beautiful animations, beautiful transitions between your slides. If people don't find it useful, if they don't see how it applies to what they're doing every day, they're not ever going to be engaged. They'll never engage with something that they don't find useful, especially in today's society where our time is limited, our time is precious, and we're always pressed for it, especially at work, right? And if you look at this list here that I have on the slide, if you're familiar with andragogy and adult learning principles, these are pretty much in line with all of the adult learning principles that we know scientifically are true of our adult learners, right? They want some sort of autonomy. Can you give them choice about things, right? Can you, get them involved in ways where you're giving them autonomy? Can you get them involved in ways where they're able to make choices about how to participate, how to, solve problems, things like that? Again, explain why it matters to them. Somebody put WIFM in the chat, WIIFM. And if you've heard of that before, it means what's in it for me, right? Why am I here? Why am I spending my time on this when I could be doing something else, right? Explain that to them up front, why it matters to them. If it's something that doesn't matter to them, and you're like, I think Pam asked the question in the chat, what do I do if I have to give people this training and I know it doesn't apply, right? Have them figure it out, right? Have that be one of the activities is, how does this apply to your job? They might be able to find a way that you haven't thought of, right? And so explaining why it matters to them, or having them explain and discover why it matters to them, is a great way to do that. Give them opportunities to practice. Now, please note, I said opportunities plural. How many times have you attended a training where there was one small role play exercise at the very end and that was it? Like 90 minutes lecture, one small exercise, right? That's not really opportunities to practice. And we know that we need practice to improve our performance, right? Whether that's, as a kid, learning how to ride a bike, as an adult, learning a new language, we need to practice it in order to learn it. So having a one-time leadership training, I just talked to a poor friend that had to do this recently, where she had to create I think it was 2 to 4 hours leadership training on every topic in leadership, like all the topics, right? Like crucial conversations, performance management, like day-to-day, everything, 10 minutes per topic. And they were asked to, they were asked to do role play during those 10 minutes per topic, right? Which is not a lot of time, right? So as much as we can, give them those opportunities to practice. And I love what Pam says too, is that we need to stop thinking ourselves as teachers and be facilitators to help them learn it and experience. Yes, because at the end of the day, it's not about you, right? At the end of the day, it really isn't about you as the facilitator, and you are only as successful as the people who are attending your training session, right? You are only as successful as they are to turn around and apply it to their role, right? So giving them those opportunities to practice, and then leveraging your experience and theirs. We're a social people, right? We learn from each other a lot. That worst training experience that I told you about at the very beginning of today's session, where I had that facilitator who told all those personal stories and we had no idea what we were supposed to be doing. She divided us into groups on the first day, and we worked with those groups. It was like a 4-day long virtual training where it was like half a day. And within those groups, we figured out what we were supposed to be doing and what we were supposed to be learning. And if I hadn't been in those groups, that wouldn't have been a successful training for me, because I wouldn't have learned anything. But it was because of the groups that I was put in, where we kind of helped each other through the content. We helped each other learn. And we started kind of like putting together those experiences, and we were able to kind of make our own meaning out of it, right? And there's a question in the chat that says, what about some audience members who expect us to be teachers and give all the answers? How to deal with that? I would encourage you to flip it back on people. Yeah, maybe they expect that, but if you continue to flip it back on them and say, yeah, like I'll help you here in the beginning, but now I want you to do some of that as well. That's part of that like trust building, right? Some people do. They say, I just want to sit here and just please give me all these. Just give me all the information, give me all the answers. But if you set the expectation up front that this is going to be interactive. I'm going to expect you to tell me things. I'm going to tell you things. I'm not going to stand up here and talk at you. I think that's part of the expectation setting, right? Tap into their internal motivators, right? We talked about before, I saw in the comments, people were talking about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, and what are people's motivation to learn, and are they able to take something away from the session, right? I would say that probably one of the biggest motivators for people when they enter into training sessions like this is that they want to do better at their job, right? And that's probably common for most people. I've met very few people in my life who go to work in the morning and go, I want to do a really crappy job today. I'm going to do the worst job ever. Like, I'm just going to be so lazy. I'll be lucky if they don't fire me. I met very few people with that attitude. Most people I find want to at least do a decent job, right? And so, but maybe depending on your specific audience, right? You might be working with a sales team or military members or people at a sports organization. And so there might be a culture of competitive spirit that you can tap into. Okay, maybe we'll do some sort of like group-based game where we have two groups competing against each other, right? Maybe that's something that we can kind of facilitate, but realize very importantly that not every audience is going to be like that. Not every audience is going to respond to kind of that gamification and competitiveness, right? Some people might shut down if that's presented. So you really have to kind of, again, understand that audience and tap into those motivators. And then again, above all else, focus on the practical application. How are they going to be able to use this moving forward? What will they need to do? How will they be able to, in their specific scenario, given their specific situation, how will they be able to do this, right? Now, this is a lot of kind of theoretical, okay, like we'll structure these, we'll structure the content like this, but how do we kind of make it happen? How do we know if it's working? How do we see the results of what it is that we're trying to accomplish? How do we measure these objectives, right? And so, yes, of course, a way that people typically do it is knowledge checks or multiple choice question quizzes. But I'll be very transparent and share with you that I don't like multiple choice quizzes at the end of learning. And I say that with like an asterisk, like it really depends on the multiple choice quiz, but most of the ones that I've seen are asking just about factual information that has been learned during the learning experience or the training, and is asking them to remember it 30 minutes after they just learned it, but there's no connection to their real world application. And then there's no connection to like, can they still do this? Or do they still remember it 3 weeks from now, 6 months from now? They may still need the information. But if we ask them these very concentrated, specific questions right at the very end of the session, or we ask them these very like, okay, now do you remember what year was this company founded in? These arbitrary when are they going to have to know that, right? So that's why I don't particularly like multiple choice quizzes as a way to measure learning objectives. But I did want to offer you some alternatives as well. These are all things that can be measured, especially if you record sessions and you have some sort of AI platform that gives you summaries or things like that. It can really kind of help with some of these because they're a bit more qualitative, but they're going to give you as a trainer and a facilitator a really good idea of whether or not people are understanding and processing what it is that you're trying to share with them. So one of the things that I use a lot, I've used it here so far today, are reflection questions. And the reason that these work really well and integrating them in your training is really good is because they encourage metacognition. They encourage people to think about their own thinking and to think about their own learning. And by doing that, it gives them some agency over it, right? It's that autonomy that they want. And if they're able to think about their own learning and think about how they're applying these things that they're learning and how they might use that in practice or how it might apply to them, it's going to be it's going to make those connections a lot stronger, right? Case studies or scenario discussions. Give them an actual case study, something that really happened, and discuss it. Give them a potential scenario and walk them through how they would treat things. And this helps to start create mental models in their heads, in their minds, and with their brains, so that when they encounter a situation, it doesn't even have to be the exact same. But by giving them those scenarios, giving them those case studies, they'll be able to create that mental model that goes, oh, this is kind of like that scenario that we talked about in the training. I know how to handle this, right? I know how to handle this. Teach backs. This can be done like Anna said. No, it doesn't have to be that serious. You can do it, and you can do it in groups. You can do it on one part of the training. You can do it, however you want to do teach backs, but the teach backs is where you have your audience and your students teach you something that they've learned, right? And this really helps you as a facilitator to understand whether they're getting it or not, because how they teach it, how they present it to you will show you how they're understanding it, right? So you'll be able to correct them. You'll be able to give them immediate feedback, which is really nice. So that then if they do have something wrong or incorrect, you can correct that right at the time in the situation and then move forward, right? Application mapping. This was what we were talking about a little bit, where if you don't know how this really applies to their job and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm giving this training, but I don't think it really actually applies. Like, how is this relevant to them? Then have them do it. Have them think up different applications for what they're learning. And it doesn't even have to be related to the workplace. So say, for instance, you're doing leadership development training and you're doing something on how to have better difficult conversations with your employees. You might have them apply, like, how can having difficult conversations and having better skills at that help you elsewhere? Can it help you in your relationship? Can it help you with your children's teacher? Can it help you with your aging parents, right? How can these skills help you outside of that, right? Once people think of those additional uses, it becomes more personally meaningful to them, immediately making them more engaged. If they can think of those things and why it applies, they're more likely to be engaged, right? Role play observation. Now, this isn't traditional role play. I'm not talking about like you are observing them doing role play. What I'm suggesting here is if you have a co-facilitator, that you and the co-facilitator do a role play and then have them critique you, or even do like a short recording ahead of time of you and a colleague doing some role play. Having them critique, having them give specific points of, oh, this is good, oh, this is bad, oh, this is good. That helps them to like practice that higher level thinking. And it also gives you a good indication based on their criteria and their critique of whether they're really understanding the concepts, right? And then last but certainly not least, this is probably one of my favorites, is wrong answers only. So you think of a concept that you've already taught, right? We'll stick with the example I've been using of leadership, difficult conversations. And then you say, okay, what's the best way to approach an employee who you need to have a really difficult performance conversation with? Wrong answers only, bad answers only. And so maybe your audience will say things like, send them a really vague email that says, we need to talk, or send them a Slack message or a Teams message that just says, we need to talk now. Panic people, right? But by getting those wrong answers, by having them give only wrong answers, it really makes them use those critical thinking skills of contrast. But again, it shows you, are they Are they understanding the concepts? Is this a thing that contrasts? Is this the opposite of what we're talking about, right? And that's a really good strategy to use too. So one last note I wanted to make as we're talking about like crafting the content, right? Or presenting the content or altering the way we present the content to provide these opportunities for assessment and practice, is the use of technology. So I want us all to remember that technology is just a tool, right? Everything we use, Zoom today is just a tool. You know, the slide decks, those are just a tool. And so I would encourage everyone here to first do the planning, right? Find those outcomes, find those objectives, learn about your audience, figure out what strategies you want to use, figure out what assessments you want to use, and then select the tools that support that, not the other way around. So don't say, you know what, I'm doing this training and I really want to have some group stuff because like I want these people to work in groups. It's better to say, I'm doing this training and I have 4 case studies. This is probably a really good opportunity to put people in groups and work through these case studies together. Do you see the difference? Leading with the actual lesson and the objectives versus leading with the tools, right? And yes, practice on the tech and have a contingency plan sort of backup so that you can keep the conversation going. Because the other thing is, if you do focus on those outcomes and objectives, it'll be so much easier for you to pivot. If you really understand those and you understand what you want to accomplish, you know, that's a great way to do it. And what I always warn people of is be really, really aware of cognitive load. When people are entering a new training situation, they are experiencing a little bit of cognitive overload, most likely. So we don't want things like what I call seductive details, because that's what the research calls them. Things like, oh, I have to have a unique AI generated image for each slide. Well, if it's not adding to what you're trying to say on the slide, and it's just because you want some sort of visual to keep them engaged, that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to focus on the importance of the message, the usefulness of it. And yes, if a photo or a video or an animation helps you to explain that, absolutely use it. But don't feel this need to kind of like, oh, well, you know, these very prescriptive, well, every 15 minutes, we have to break things up. So we have to have a poll every 15 minutes. You know, allow the content to guide you rather than, you know, whatever rules, you know, you typically prescribe to. And just remember that these people are learning something new. If you're also making them navigate like complex rules for a game, right? Or complex instructions on how to use a polling tool on their phone, right? That's going to take away from your presentation rather than add to it. Every tool that you use should be very easily integrated as well. Okay, so I have a question for you all because I've seen it come up in the chat a little bit here too, and I've tried to start to address it a little bit, but how can you shape the learning experience? How can you shape that training even if you didn't create it? What are some of the things that you can do? I love it. Provide real life scenarios and examples. Exactly. Interactive discussions with real life scenarios. Share your knowledge and understanding. Yeah, exactly. Sharing your expertise. Personalize it. Yeah. Storytelling. I love it. Cater to different styles. Get people involved. Get people to answer in the chat. Thank you, Pam, for noticing that I try to practice what I preach. Learning groups. Seek constant feedback. Yes. Yeah, I had somebody told me once that it makes me sound not confident because of how much I go, right? Does that make sense? In like presentations and facilitation, I'm like, I'm sorry. I used to teach college and that's like part of what we do. I say, you know, does that make sense? Does that, you know, it's not about me being not confident in what I'm saying. It's about making sure that the audience is on the same page and that I don't need to repeat something, right? So then, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't spend a little bit of time here to talk about inclusion and accessibility. If you know me at all, you know that that's something that is really passionate for me and that only helps to add to the learning experience as a whole, right? So we've talked throughout this whole presentation about creating these scenarios or case studies or asking people for their experiences, but like, there has to be a level of trust built there from you as the facilitator with your audience to be able to get them to be comfortable sharing those experiences, especially if we're talking about something difficult, especially if we're talking about something where, you know, maybe they are expected to share a not so great story, right? I started this whole thing off with asking you to share an unpleasant experience, and you were all very willing, which was lovely. But I started by sharing my experience in the hopes that it would help you to think of one or be comfortable sharing your experience. So that's the first thing, is we start by modeling that vulnerability and real feedback. And one of the things that's really important as facilitators is to not have all the answers, right? And that's hard because we want to, because we feel like we're obligated to. But it is so much more relatable to say, actually, I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to write that down and I'm going to contact this person, and you know, in tomorrow's session I'll get back to you, right? You know, somebody said it, and Gloria says in the comments, start the training with a relatable story. That's part of how you build that trust, right? If you make a mistake, own that mistake. Parking lot questions, right? Start these conversations early, right? And normalize getting it wrong as part of learning. Now, I don't know if you'll have the opportunity to do this, but one of my colleagues, while I was doing my PhD in instructional design, was studying failure as a learning mechanism. And I found it fascinating because one of the things that she was looking at was putting learners or the audience in a position where there's no right answer, just so that they can be comfortable with getting it wrong, right? And sometimes we can do that in scenarios too, and in situations where we can give them, you know, say we're doing some kind of role play like customer service, and we give them a customer who is just, it doesn't matter what you say, this is never going to go right. This customer is always going to be mean to you. And like Anna said in the comments, failure is a great way to learn. Think about, do we have any video gamers here in the comments? Do we have any gamers, period? Think about when you fail, right? Think about Super Mario, right? What happens? You're trolling along in Super Mario, and you hit, you hit a fire flower. Okay, now you know the next time you go through that fire flower is going to come out of that pipe, and you make sure that you jump over it. And then you keep going, and then you fall in a hole. Okay, you start over. Now you know you have to jump over the pipe and the hole, right? You make those corrections, but we do that in real life too. So if we give them opportunities where it's okay to fail, where it's okay to get it wrong in this safe space, so that you avoid getting it wrong in real life, when you're really faced with that situation, that's a really powerful thing, right? And then set them up to apply what they've learned. I know I've said that multiple, but again, repetition, right, is part of that retention. Is as long as we're setting them up to say, okay, how can we actually apply this? Can we have a situation? Do we have access to, you know, a sandbox of the product that we're trying to teach, that we can have people actually go in and try and make something, right? Do we have something where we can have people, you know, how about we all work together and request a day off together on the HR system, right? And yes, like Anna said, it's a great thing to remind people, here's what you shouldn't do if you make a mistake during the training, right? But that it's a safe space to do it here. Just make sure that you don't do it in the future, right? And then, of course, there's accessibility and facilitating for all learners. So I saw somebody else in the comments had asked about, how do you get those quiet learners involved, right? And I didn't address that because I was going to address that here, right? But here are some accessibility tips, right? Whether you're virtual or in person, I think it's incredibly important that we include everyone and we include all of the learners, because without that, it can be very difficult. Like, imagine before you even start your session, through only accessibility, you have alienated 10% of your learners without even meaning to. But if you think about it from the beginning and you plan the session accordingly, you'll be able to avoid that and you won't really have to worry about it, right? So virtually, if you have, the ability, the tools, Zoom, Teams, Meet, they all kind of offer these multiple ways to interact, right? So you can use the react button, right? You have these reactions. Here in Zoom, you can give like a thumbs up or a heart or a celebrate emoji. So you can tell people, as I'm presenting, feel free to use the emojis to respond to what I'm saying and give me some indication of, whether it resonates with you or you have questions or it's confusing, something like that. But what I will say, and this, I realize that this is very contentious. I realize that this is a hot topic, but I will always say it. Forcing your participants to have their cameras on 100% of the time is inaccessible. There are a multitude of reasons why somebody may not be able to have their camera on, right? That have nothing to do with their willingness to participate, right? They may just have bandwidth issues and they may not be able to hear you clearly unless they have their video off. They may be, caring for a loved one. They may be at, in a hospital waiting for someone to get out of surgery. It's not that they're not willing to participate, but maybe they don't want you to know about it, right? And you can say in the beginning of the session, I would love it if you had your cameras on, because then I can see you and interact with you. So I would love if you would have your cameras on as often as you can, but making it a requirement is, yes, surveillance. Like Catherine said, it feels like surveillance. It feels punitive. And I found that many of the people who are like, you have to have your camera on, you have to participate, I'm going to call on you, they facilitate from a place of like fear, a place of fear and of punitive and, of being the authoritative figure. And I would encourage you as the facilitator to not view yourself as an authoritative figure. These participants better listen to me, right? But as like a trusted helper, a trusted mentor, if you will, right? And sometimes giving the people the freedom and say, I'd love for you to have your cameras on as much as you are comfortable with, because it helps me to see you and I want to be able to see you and, feel like I'm interacting with you. You'll be surprised. More people actually turn their cameras on. It's been my experience when I present it that way, than people I know who are like, you have to have your camera on the whole time, or like get passively aggressively shamed into it. I've also heard that. Please don't do that. Please don't go, well, I can't see her because she doesn't have her camera on, right? Oh, that's the worst. Make sure that you're verbally describing visuals and key points. A lot of times, if I answer a question in the chat, I reread it back out loud, just in case somebody missed it. Maybe the chat is moving and I want to make sure somebody didn't miss it because they didn't have the time to read it. But also, I don't know what other people are having going on. Maybe somebody is taking notes and they aren't looking at the chat right now, right? So, verbally describing the things that are on the screen, that are in the chat, using clear audio, using live captioning, if you have that availability, if you have that option with whatever tool that you're using, and allow processing time. Think back to training where you just talked about a really complex part. And then the person goes, okay, and next we're going to talk about and then they just like quickly move on to the next thing, and you're still like kind of like your head spinning. You're like, whoa, what just happened? Like we just did this whole thing. Giving a little breathing room between topics, like that's part of the reason I had these reflection questions in this today, because an hour is a long time to be talking consistently, right? An hour is a long time to listen to anyone talk. You know, I don't want to listen to myself talk for an hour. So how do we break that up, right? How do we allow that processing time? And then again, allow multiple modes of participation. Use the reaction emojis, use polls, use breakout rooms, use chats, use, invite people to raise their hand and come off mute. If people have options, they're going to pick the one that they're comfortable with, and then they're going to be more likely to participate. I don't like coming off mute because, oh my gosh, it's like the timing thing, right? You're like, well, I'm going to come off mute, and then this other person comes off mute at the same time, and you both start talking at the same time. Oh, it makes my social anxiety awful. So I would rather either use the hand raise emoji and be called on, or participate in the chat. But being able to have those options, I'm more likely, if you say type it in the chat, I'm more likely to start doing that immediately than just come off mute. I probably won't. I probably won't come off mute the whole time, because I know I'll start talking at the same time as somebody else, right? For in-person training, the physical accessibility of your room, right? The physical accessibility of your slides, right? Is the color contrast, the text on the background, is it visible from the back of the room? Is the size of your text visible from the back of the room, right? Avoid any fast-paced activities. Again, if you have something with like a lot of instructions, a game or something like that, plan to spend time on those instructions, right? Make the materials usable for everyone. If you have a handout, if you have, a link to a handout, is that PDF able to be read by a screen reader? Do you have a version of the handout that has large text if you should need it, right? Think about those things, like how to make those materials usable for everyone. And then another thing that's kind of similar to the cameras on is give people the opportunity to opt out of on-the-spot speaking. I know people, especially when you say this is going to be an interactive session, people start to panic, right? And one thing I know as a former English professor is adults hate reading out loud. You know why? Because we rarely do it. We rarely read out loud in our normal lives. Like, think about it. You just don't spend a lot of time reading out loud. So when people do it, they mess up. They feel like all eyes on them. Or is there a way that you can ask for volunteers only? Is there a way that you can change that slightly so you're not putting anybody on the spot, right? Doing volunteer-led or and one of the things is, do you have a little way to bribe those participants, right? If you volunteer, you get a piece of candy. I remember back when I started teaching college, somebody told me, well, Heidi, you can't just take in candy to your students. That's not going to work. And I was like, I can still be bribed by candy. So surely they can too. And a lot of people I know can be bribed by candy, but also to be accessible, not everyone can eat candy. So maybe having alternate little prizes or bribery methods too, considering your whole audience.
Thank you so much, Aditi, for the wonderful session and sending for this recording. And participant, if you have any question, please feel free to use the chat box. We'll be taking this question to our speaker, and all of the questions will be answered by our blogs and by our LinkedIn post. So let's start with the session. Let's move to the session on next part. So just allow me a minute to share my screen. Meanwhile, please do let us know how you felt about the sessions. So if you guys are ready for opting your certification into the learning and development professional, so now the certification is available on our website. You can check on our website, and we are also giving a complimentary coupon code to all of our participants, which will give you a 20% off for using this coupon code on the certification. So I'm sharing the coupon code link into the chat box so that you don't miss out, guys. So if you're ready for the certification, opt from our website, use the coupon code link, and get the 20% off and get certified into the learning and development professionals. And before wrapping up, I just wanted to make a quick announcement, as I have been started announcing from few days regarding the utility tool into the all of the sessions, and I've also started getting the response from a lot of participants who with to whom utility tool has been a most helpful for their job hunting journey. So I would strongly recommend you to use the utility tool, because in today's AI era, everyone is taking the help of AI. HRs and recruiters are also one of those people who take the help of AI, because they do get a lot of resumes. So they are using the AI screening ATS system now. But let's face the fact that is also one of the biggest reason that most candidate resumes are getting rejected, even though after having the skills and experience. So what you can do, you can take the help of utility tool. We are also giving a complimentary coupon code to all of our participants, which will give you 100% off. So use this coupon code, get 100% off, and take the help of utility tool. You can log in into utility tool by your LinkedIn ID and password, and it will give you a recommendation according to the job designation you're targeting and the industry you're targeting. It will give you the recommendation to improve your LinkedIn profile, which will make your resume or your LinkedIn profile in front of the HR and recruiters, and will make your job hunting journey even more easier. So when everyone is taking the help of AI, why or not? Take the help of utility tool and make your job hunting journey even more easier. And as we are conducting the other sessions as well, so the GSDC Studio AI implementation series is also one of the sessions which we are conducting. So tomorrow today we had Jonathan Wright with us. Tomorrow we are going to have Saurav Saxena at 9:30 p.m. Singapore timing, 7 p.m. Indian timing, 7:30 a.m. Central timing, and 8:30 a.m. Eastern timing at 10th of December. So if you are a AI enthusiastic people, I would strongly recommend you to join this webinar. And if you are a ISO enthusiastic people, I would strongly recommend you to join our webinar of ISO 4201 and ISO 2701 across industries, in which you are going to master in compliance action learning how ISO 4201 and ISO 2701 strength business resilience across sectors. And this is going to be conducted on 10th and 11th of December. Today we have Alexander with us. Tomorrow we are going to have Dr. Yuri Liul, and the timings are 10:30 p.m. Singapore timing, 8 p.m. Indian timing, and 8:30 a.m. Central timing, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern timing. So if you are an ISO enthusiastic, I would strongly recommend you to join this webinar. And tomorrow we are going to have one more session of learning and development at the same timing, which will be 11:30 p.m. Singapore timing, 9 p.m. Indian timing, and 9:30 a.m. Central timing, and 10:30 a.m. Eastern timing. So I'm hoping to see you all tomorrow as well. With that, it's time to celebrate our referral champions. We have Bhanu Durgesh, EBI, and Avinash Kumar. So, special thanks to all three of you for helping us simplify our initiative and reach it to the wider global audience. If you want to be one of our speakers for learning capsules, webinar, and podcast, please do reach out at pratibha@gsdccouncil.org. So these are the platforms where you can connect with us for staying updated regarding the upcoming events and trend. Our LinkedIn, our website, our WhatsApp group. I'm sharing all of the links into the chat box so that you didn't miss out. Also, we would love to hear your feedback. We would love to know what resonated most with you, or what are your session key takeaways. So I'm sharing the reviews.io link into the chat box also, so that you can drop your suggestions and feedback over there. Please do stay connected with all of the platform for staying updated regarding upcoming events and trends. With that, it's time to come to an event. Thank you so much once again, Haditi, for sending us the recorded session. Hoping to see you live in the future sessions. Thank you so much, participant, once again joining into this session. And I'm hoping to see you all tomorrow as well. Till then, keep learning, keep energizing. Have a good day, good night, good evening, wherever you are.